Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. Follow the link in the description to pre-order a copy of the book so you'll be the first to receive it on the date of September 1st, 2022. The Outdoor Minimalist Podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. On this episode of the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast, we will be focusing a lot on mindset and talking a little bit about fly fishing. To help me explore the idea of prioritizing your experience over the equipment itself, no matter the outdoor activity or pursuit, I have the pleasure of talking to Daniel Ritz. Daniel is an outdoor journalist and writer based in Boise, Idaho. Ritz's work has been published by Trout Unlimited, Orvis, Western Native Trout Initiative, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Outdoor Idaho Magazine, Alaska Sporting Journal, Fish Alaska Magazine, and Visit Idaho. His editorial focus is contemporary issues regarding conservation, the environment, recreation, and legislation. Most recently, Ritz created a 40-part series sharing the experience of the Western Native Trout Challenge that was published by Trout Unlimited, Orvis and Western Native Trout Initiative, and Mountain Fly Company. In it, he wrote personal experience-based essays and natural history and science-based species profiles for each of the 20 available native trout and char species of the western 12 states of the United States. Currently, Ritz volunteers as a communications coordinator for the TED True Blood chapter of Trout Unlimited and Idaho Backcountry Hunter and Anglers. Born in Baltimore, Maryland, Ritz graduated in 2009 from Salisbury University on the eastern shore of Maryland with a bachelor's degree in journalism and philosophy. He now resides in Boise with his partner Holly and their wire-haired pointing griffin named Trout and an oversized cat named Julio. Maybe it's Julio. I should have asked that. Adventuring plans on your calendar? Remember to grab your Lava Linens travel towel on your way out the door. Founded by a mother-daughter team, Lava Linens crafts durable, luxurious travel towels as a more sustainable and better-performing alternative to microfiber and cotton towels. Powered by flax and hemp, they're designed to be by your side for years to come. Use the code OutdoorMinimalist for 15% off your next order. Thank you, Daniel, for joining me today on episode 10 of the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. Before we kind of jump into the topic of prioritizing your experiences over equipment and possessions, can you just give a brief overview of your experience in the outdoor industry and kind of what got you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I appreciate you having me on, and this is pretty exciting. This is something that I've been looking into incorporating into my own kind of practices and outdoor experiences, and the opportunity to talk about it kind of is a very unique angle on this trip, so I'm pretty excited. Thank you. Experience in the outdoor industry. So in a past chapter of life, I was a surfer, and I worked for a brand in the surf industry for a long time. Started a shop and was a shop rat slinging used surfboards, and then moved on to managing a shop that I was too young to manage, and had a healthy dose of business experience that way. And operating a multi-million-dollar surf shop out of Ocean City, Maryland. I went to school at Salisbury University and traveled around and wound up working for a brand where I would travel around opening up shops. And the shop experience was really my focus in the outdoor industry. It was that sort of niche, small shop mentality where it's very sociable, really prioritizing customer experience, and that there's so much more than just retail. Full-time, I went to school, and I've worked as a writer, then went from writing features mostly, focused on the outdoors and conservation, kind of pivoted later in life to I'm now a full-time freelance writer and journalist, so again, focused on the outdoors and largely focused on conservation. Personally, I enjoy fly fishing, and so that's been the focus of my recent body of work. I'm based in Boise, Idaho, so I spend a lot of time combing around the Mountain West region of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, places like that.
Yeah, Boise is a really, really cool kind of, it's not necessarily like a central location, but for me it feels central for like mountain sports, and I really enjoy that area of the country.
It's fantastic. Boise is a great place to live and a great base. Like I said, I'm lucky enough to move around quite a bit. Boise is a very dynamic place. It's changing a lot, some for better and some I think a lot of people would say for worse, but it is a very interesting place to live and the capital of the state. It is, yeah, it's really central. Like you said, you have the Central Mountains and the largest wilderness space in the lower 48 that we spend a lot of time in the Frank Church River No Return Wilderness and over across the Bitterroots into Montana. And yeah, it's a great place to live. We love being here.
Awesome. It sounds like you have a pretty diverse background in the outdoor industry, so you kind of have multiple perspectives coming from like an experience-based background, but also an equipment-based background if you're opening all those shops and stuff. So what kind of inspired that switch from that retail space to freelance writing?
Well, I think as it wasn't necessarily a switch. As I went to school, I double majored in philosophy and journalism, and I have the written word has been a focus of mine throughout, whether it was freelance or professional full time. So I was doing that during my time working in the surf industry, and I had a fantastic experience. But being a classic overthinker, you're always evaluating what are the values that I'm working on, or that I'm working through. When you're working with a customer, you're looking out for their best interest and their genuine experience. But you are trying to run a business as well, and so that was something that was always top of mind for me. Was just providing a really healthy, positive experience that I thought was contributing to my community while also operating a healthy business. And I thought the best place for me, which I am very grateful for my opportunity in my past, was that I was able to keep that on that local shop atmosphere level where I was still really attached to the impacts that our personal interactions were making. So I wouldn't say that it was necessarily a switch as much as it just, my transition away from that particular industry into focusing on the other part of it was just a personal choice that I enjoy the experience more than that sales scenario, and taking that out of it has really opened up a lot of doors and a lot of experiences for me that I'm grateful for. But like I said, it is essential, and that shop small community atmosphere can be really healthy, and I think there's a great approach there that I always enjoyed sort of studying and acting in, and I'm grateful for the opportunities that I did have.
So you started out with surfing, which is really interesting that you kind of gravitated more towards fly fishing, but maybe not so much because they're both very water related. I'm not very familiar with fly fishing, but when we first connected, that was kind of the focus that you thought really could be applicable to this minimalist mindset. So for me and for listeners that maybe aren't overly familiar with that activity, could you just explain a little bit more about it?
Sure. I see the overlap with fly fishing to my past experience with surfing, and I'll walk through it's very direct. I working in the surf industry, and I'm a passionate person that likes to participate actively in my things that I enjoy in my life, and I make it something that I'm involved in on all levels as I go through my day. And so I was working in surf, and I was surfing at every chance that I could, and surrounding myself in that community. And after doing it for a certain period of time, I guess I did get a little bit overwhelmed, and I found myself really fascinated by spearfishing. I was living in Central California at the time, where that's a big activity that people do, and it was just another way to connect with a space that I really enjoyed and understood. The water scenario and the waves and the bathymetry, the bottom of the ocean, things like that were very relatable, but they were different enough to really intrigue me. And one thing led to another, and shortly after visiting Idaho for the first time, I was living here, and fly fishing it's really that curiosity, and it's the search for me, because I enjoy that. I don't mean to romanticize that phrase. I know it's common in a couple of different industries, but that search is really, for me, it's the intersection of where you have physical discipline, a little bit of academic kind of mental practice, some research, some understanding, but also there's that element of luck, and you could have everything all lined up for any of those. And I'm really just interested in that opportunity. It's where you find that intersection of where those things come together. And I think any surfer, any fisherman, any fly fisherman, most people in the outdoors would understand how that relates to their experience. And that's where I just found myself focused on. But inherent in that is that it's significantly more. I find that experience and thinking of my outdoor experience in that way as compared to just, the one bitchin' big wave or the biggest fish or the what have you. It's not that real moment that you wind up looking back on. And so I just finished a really big trip, and looking back, it's very few of those singular moments of the catch and the fight of the fish that you hear people talk about so much. It's the whole things like understanding the weather and the work that you had to put in to climb the mountain to get there, or the drive there, or the elements that are surrounding, or the historical narrative that leads to that experience happening. I just find that context really interesting, and I think that relates to most anything that people are passionate about in the outdoors, but mine is fly fishing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just listening to you explain that, it got me thinking about trips that I've done and kind of remembering those experiences and kind of like how I've transitioned into different activities and how related those experiences really are. But I do want to talk about your trip. So, what was the trip? And it was pretty long, wasn't it? Wasn't it like 6 months or something?
It took 6 months in total. I was on the road consecutively for a 5 month period, and so yeah,
Oh,
that
geez.
was
Okay.
so I've completed what's called the Western Native Trout Challenge, which is it's a framework to where anglers can go out and be recognized for pursuing any number of the Western trout is a type of fish that's iconic in the Western United States. It's an international mecca location that people travel to, and people live here to fish these high mountain streams, and as well as places like California and New Mexico all the way to Alaska. So the thing that I did was I went and I wrote a series for the conservation group Trout Unlimited and a group of other partners, including Orvis and Montana Fly Company and another Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is another group that I worked with. But I basically wrote a series compiling my experience pursuing each of all of the native species of the Western United States. So that was 20 species. It was a 40-part series, and wrote full-length articles that you can have the links in the show notes. I don't need to go through the www dots, but yeah, so it was successful, and it's all in an effort to raise awareness of our native species, because I think studying native species, and species meaning it could be plants or animals, or knowing your surroundings, I think really is a key step that people can take to really becoming more aware of their environment and their ecosystem around them. And I think it inevitably leads to people feeling as if they have a healthier relationship with their space, with their place, with a capital P, which is kind of a whole concept of conservation. But I think examining your native species and the stories, and if you can get your head around that, I think that's a real step in the door to having a healthy understanding of your place and managing it as such.
Yeah, that education piece, but also feeling a deeper connection to any type of landscape or wildlife while you're recreating, I think does kind of change the overall experience. And I suppose it could potentially be deeper for a fisherman. I'm not an angler myself, but having that relationship with the animals that you're interacting directly with, I would guess kind of shapes the experience.
Absolutely. Oh, I personally think so. And there's nothing wrong with, there's all sorts of different types of fishing, and there's different types of people. And so I'm not proposing that this is the way that everyone should. But if you are interested if you really enjoy fly fishing or fishing out of the local bass pond or any of them, I just see if you're interested in having a more contextual experience, if you want to just spend more time learning about things that you obviously love, if you love one aspect of this, maybe it is the experience of casting a fly rod, which is a beautiful art in its own. Like, there's the history of who made it, where did it come from, where did the materials take this, what's the history, where did that develop? Well, is that of the European lineage or was that something is that an art that came from South America, let's say? And there are those stories, and I think for me personally, studying native species, that was my foot in the door. And I think a lot of people ask, it's pretty overwhelming, right? How do I approach the outdoors in a responsible way? Or I want to be responsible. I want to be environmentally conscious. I want to be a responsible consumer. I think for me, having a greater understanding of the native species in my place was the way that I did that. And so, yeah, I'm not saying it's for everybody, but I get a lot out of it. And I haven't met too many folks that have had a bad experience when I sort of challenge them to, like, why don't you go in your backyard and figure out what was there at the time that people kind of really colonized, and what's from there. I think that's something that is really proven to be worthwhile to friends and family time and time again.
Perhaps that's more of your philosophy background kind of taking play.
Maybe, yeah.
But I think that is a really important mindset shift that a lot of people are experiencing. I guess you would also be a millennial. So our generation is starting to have a larger push towards analyzing experiences and kind of understanding the meaning on a deeper level versus just looking at the belongings that kind of like take you there. I know that that's not true because we still live in a consumer society, but there have been some studies that have seen that there is somewhat of a mindset shift going on in our society as a whole that is bringing on more of a consumer marketplace that pushes experience over the things that provide that experience. Does that make sense? That was a very like long-winded explanation.
It's been my experience that, and your question makes perfect sense. Like, it's been my experience that you have to invest in yourself into, we're utilizing these spaces and these occasions, whether it's riding waves or catching fish, or we are getting so much out of these natural occurrences and these natural spaces. We're walking to them, hiking to them, driving to them. Like we are taking an enjoyment away, but we're also, we are treading feet. We are taking something from that nothing is free. To me, I think I became really involved in conservation through, I think it takes some investment. And I don't have the understanding of demographics and trends by generation that you just described in that question, but really to me, it boils down to, I think hopefully people are becoming a little bit more aware of generations past and decisions made have a tangible impact on our world. And I hope that people are ready to start investing of themselves, of their time to enhance and secure and protect some of those experiences for future generations. And hopefully trying to, there's no need for shame or there's no need to spend that time backtracking, but really, hopefully people are realizing that these these decisions can have real impacts, and we are in some ways suffering from some of those mistakes of the past, and hopefully we're ready to step up and start participating. So if you take something away, I don't know, I talk a lot about how just sharing what I learn, but this is one thing that I will tell. Like, I beg of anyone listening to, if you take something away from a natural outdoor experience, give something back to it, because nothing is free.
I love that. I think that it's a very direct mindset, but it's really memorable and impactful. And I honestly think that that's sometimes in the outdoor industry why people that are more in the sportsman realm, so anglers or hunters, they tend to have more of that direct impact on conservation and focus more on experience and things like that, because there is like a direct correlation between what they're doing. Like you are taking something away, physically taking something away. So it's not as abstract.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, and it's a little bit of a, I'm not a hunter myself by definition, but as an angler, like when you are, it's a living, breathing thing, and when you are experiencing, and this is that engagement that people speak of, when you are really experiencing something and you're grasping it in such a tangible way as connecting with it and feeling like there is a connection that is empowering. And sure, there's a lot of moral ethical conversation that can come along with that, but I doubt many people would agree that like that direct connection is powerful. And I take pride in that. As a sportsman, I do take pride in the North American conservation model, where folks' participation and engagement is what is fueling the conservation of the continuance of the thing that they're involved with, whether it's hunting or fishing or angling. I think that's, there's a reason why it's the model that is sought for the world over. And I personally am a fan of that, but to speak to your point, like that direct connection is something that it's a large responsibility that I hope it healthily weighs heavily on people, I guess would be the best way to describe it.
Yeah. I like that setup of mindset and perception and your personal perspective on sports themselves, because it can go beyond fly fishing. But I do kind of want to do, maybe this is a little bit of a hard switch, but that's okay. I'm kind of wondering, like, as far as fly fishing goes, to me as an outsider, I like flip-flop back and forth. I'm like, sometimes it appears to be like a very complex sport
Hmm.
in the gear and things that you need, but on the other hand, it does seem relatively minimal. So as someone who that's a big part of your life, what is actually true?
I'm gonna quote Craig Matthews is a guy from West Yellowstone. He's an iconic. He owned a fly shop, and he's a fly tyer and a fantastic fisherman. And I don't have the pleasure of knowing him personally, but I read something from him a long time ago where, to paraphrase, he describes that fly fishing can be as complicated as you want it to be, and when you're making it complicated to get the right fly on the end of your line, or the right rod, or the perfect this or that, understand that most of the time you shouldn't ever get mentally too far away from remembering that you're doing that by choice, that you're choosing to go down that path. You're going down that rabbit hole because you're enjoying that, but you don't have to. One of the most beautiful parts I think about fishing in general and fly fishing specifically is how a lot of this, especially at home where I live in the Mountain West, you have all this access to public lands. As far as equipment, you can get into some great entry level equipment. Brands are making such good gear nowadays. It's really hard to find something that's not going to work. Investing in something quality that you can believe in, and then getting out and setting foot. Fly fishing is really about using your legs, and getting to the place and spending time. There's a pretty common saying that you can't catch fish if your line's not in the water. If your fly's not on the water. So it's much less about spending time buying more or researching the perfect this or that. It's get out there. You got to give yourself the chance to make it happen, because you could spend infinite amount of money on the perfect thing, but if you put it in the wrong place or you don't know how to use it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that is kind of a barrier that a lot of people, anytime they're starting a new activity, it doesn't necessarily have to be fishing, but it could be literally anything, even outside of outdoor sports. It can be kind of intimidating to be an outsider and to kind of look at this mountain of content that is online saying, these are the best options and this is why you should use them. And it's hard to know what to believe until you're able to kind of build that foundation yourself and that community to kind of support you having an experience that makes you want to return to the sport again.
Well, I think that's you tapped into something that again is a similarity that I haven't actually really thought about before. But you had asked about my past life of a traveling paycheck to plane ticket surfer. Like there's no right way to surf, just like there's no right way to go fly fishing. There's ways that your equipment will work better, and you can you can own 50 fly boxes and 10 rods, and there will things that will make it easier, let's say, but there is no right way, which is one of those beautiful things. For the most part, we're not cheating death or anything like that, so the stakes are pretty low for the most part. You can do it the way that you enjoy it and what's working, and you can build from there. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things, is that I like the word style, and I like how there is a way that you have a certain style, you have a certain practice, and I like activities that give you that opportunity to enjoy it, because you could pick the wrong fly with the wrong rod and figure out the new way to get that fish. It's been avoiding you for weeks and stuff like that. That's really fun sometimes, and that's the beauty of fly fishing to me, is that there is no right way.
I feel like I'm learning so much about about fishing.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, hey, you're right around the way, so let's get on the water, but we
Yeah.
can talk about that another time. I'd love to take you out. I think anybody's got something to take away from fly fishing.
Since we're kind of talking about like entering, like barriers to entry and entering a new sport,
Sure.
what would be something that you think is helpful in terms of mindset when you're approaching a new activity, so you kind of don't get caught up in that gearhead mentality?
I'm gonna lean back into the origins of the story, which for me is go to your local shop. Don't the internet is a great thing, and big box stores can maybe even have a better price, but go to your local shop and describe what you want to do. Talk to the owner of the shop or some of the staff, and this is what I want to do, and that could extend as far as they cost money, but guides and outfitters, those guys are just wealths of knowledge, and having a great day on the river and eating lunch on the gravel bar on the side with a guide and picking their brain and like, learning from them. Those are investments that can be really, really, really valuable. But even if you're not able financially to do that in the beginning, go to a shop, go to a specialty shop, and talk to some of the staff and ask them, hey, this is what I'm really trying to do. And they're going to steer you the right way so that you get what you want out of it. And now you're encouraging that self-fulfilling prophecy. You have a good time. You're going to go back for the next one, the different place, and it's going to expand from there. But I think just guessing and picking it off the internet or looking at the steel at the big box store, not that, some of those folks don't provide great opportunities for certain things, but if you're if you're looking to break into something that has that opportunity, I could not suggest enough to take advantage of it, because that's what they're there for and that's what they love to do.
Yeah, I mean, I am a pretty big advocate for when you're starting new or even when you're traveling to seek out the local outfitters and even renting some of their equipment to try different types, or like you're saying, try different styles if that exists in that sport. And that does just bring it back to your experience. Because if you're having a good time and you're learning a lot and you can share that experience with someone else, I feel like that is something that always draws me back to an activity.
Absolutely. And I think the more you're focused on having a good experience as compared to what you don't have, that's the key ingredient to having a great day on the water, is just enjoying what's there and enjoying the pursuit and the opportunity, as compared to the opposite, the glass half empty, which, oh, I didn't get this fish because of I didn't have this thing or what have you. This answers or kind of revisits a question you asked earlier, but like really the responsibility in fly fishing is really on you. Most all of the basic entry level equipment is all good enough that like there's no reason, for better or for worse, it's all your fault. So, which I mean in a positive way. Go spend the time, learning the techniques and the different styles, and if you put yourself in the right place and you make a great cast, you can catch a great fish with the wrong fly. It's not about what you bought or what's on there. And I think most of your experienced angling community would agree with that. It has way more to do with your skill, which is only earned over time and experience, than it does your equipment.
I kind of want to wrap it back around to that trip that you were talking about, looking at the native species, because it feels like a really big undertaking, to me at least. Like it was a big trip and a big experience. But how can you take a minimalist mindset and a minimalist approach to such like a large undertaking? I know this is something that I've kind of grappled with in the past when I do larger extended trips, because you feel like, well, you're on the road, you need to take all these things like to be comfortable and to be like safe in all of these new environments all the time. But how did you apply that to your trip?
Well, I think it starts in the beginning, in the planning, really. And I think one of the most important things that was, because while I've worked pretty extensively in newspapers and editing and different features, they're all very specific, right? They're little bite-sized chunks that are easily digestible and that are very specific. But this is a first for me, planning the logistics of an excursion such as this and such a big writing experience. And I think in the beginning, it really started with have a firm understanding of what you want to do. For me, I wanted to do the entirety of this Western Native Trout Challenge. You don't have to. And so other people could recognize like, oh, I want to take a 1-week trip to the Mountain West and I want to visit Idaho and Montana. And I'm going to get 4 species. I'm speaking specifically to like my example in my story, but like let's say that I want to experience these species in this place. Okay, well now you know what you're looking at. So now you go from there and you're looking at time. And I think you're planning, taking a minimalist mentality to a big excursion. The first thing you need to focus on is what are your time restraints? Because I think you want to allow as much time as you can to have the highest quality experience. Give yourself as much time as you can to have the highest quality experience, so that way you relieve yourself of the pressure of having to do it today. I have this day, I have this time, and I think that really enhances the quality of the experience and giving yourself like the best opportunity to walk away feeling as if feel with a sense of contentment that you have like really been able to absorb something. And I think the other key ingredient besides time to take, I really like this question, is that you look at your extremes first, which sounds kind of weird, but you use the word comfort. And when you're taking a minimalist approach to a big excursion, your comfort items and gear are generally the things that are going to be the last pieces. Because if you're going on a trip where you need a certain piece of equipment, it's absolutely essential that you need this. it needs to go in there. And maybe you'll have to use that thing that's on the extreme end to cover that ground in the middle that maybe you would have something that you would use every day normally. Maybe it has to double up, and maybe you can only pack one thing. But looking at your extremes, looking at the things that have time, certain dates that you can't fish during, for example, or a certain type of fishing that you need a certain kind of rod, I have to have this to enable that. Put those kind of in your box first and see what kind of room you have left to see how many cotton t-shirts you can pack. That's a metaphor, but I think you get what I'm saying.
That seems like an approach that's really applicable to a lot of different pursuits. I mean, it could be bike touring or backpacking if you want to do like an ultralight trip. You always prioritize the most needed and most used equipment first, and then you can maybe add in like one or two of those comfort items if there's room.
Yeah. But if you're going through the rain and okay, well then your absolute waterproof Gore-Tex rain jacket is in the pile first. For example, take a look at those, because if you don't have, if you have a slightly damp shirt for the next day, you'll be fine. If you're in Alaska and you don't have a dry raincoat, like, you are up shit creek, as they say.
And I do think that having the appropriate gear, like, to an extent, does enhance your experience. I mean, like, when you are talking about the type of equipment like rain jackets and rain pants, I mean, that type of preparedness enhances your experience, because if you're hiking through or fishing in the rain, it does kind of suck to be drenched and then have to return to a tent where it's going to be damp again and it might not dry, and there might be fire bans. Maybe you can't dry your clothes. Like, there's a lot of things.
No, I think you're totally right, and I think, and I use the example of the raincoat in Alaska. Like, if you go on a fly fishing trip to Alaska, like, bring 2 ironclad rain jackets, because it's going to rain, and you don't think it will, but the first one will get wet, and then you don't need to pull out the second one. And normally when you think of taking a 6-month fishing trip like I did, like, your mind immediately goes to flies and rods and etc. No, it was socks and hiking boots and rain jackets and GPS units and things. Like, those are the first things to go in the box to make sure that I eliminated as much of the risk potential as I could, so that I could focus on my experience.
I think that you had a lot of really good insights that can apply to pursuits outside of fishing as well. All of these examples that you brought up, I guess, were more niche towards fly fishing, but when I was just listening to you and thinking about it, I could apply those to all types of different trips and experiences, and it would impact my experience as well as my understanding of that landscape. So thank you for sharing all of that. And with that long-winded thank you, how can listeners learn more about you, your work, and about that, what was it called? The Trout...
Western Native Trout Challenge. So WesternNativeTroutChallenge.org is their website. So if you're interested in fly fishing at all and you either live in or want to visit the West, that's a great place to get an understanding. Or even if you're just interested in a little bit of history and geography, for all you geography nerds out there like me, it's a great resource to understanding native species, and something that a lot of people don't know a lot about, which I think is really, really cool to challenge yourself. And then let's see here. For me personally, I'm on Instagram, probably the easiest way to see what I'm up to, with the prettiest pictures, which is always nice. So that's Jacks, JACKS _experience _trading. Jack's Experience Trading Company is just my personal brand, I suppose, for all the freelance work that I do. I store everything there, and I've got a website. It's Jack's Experience Trading Company, all one word.com. So check that out. And I've got a portfolio and some links of whenever we're in the news and doing things. So yeah, I got a lot of good projects working forward. Some more native species stuff. I'm working on the steelhead, salmon steelhead, and the possible breaching of the Snake River dams, which is a really, really cool story, as well as some more native species stuff, hopefully on the East Coast, and continuing to work here in the Mountain West based in conservation. So I appreciate you guys just even hearing my rants, and this makes me, this will make my parents happy that I put out for that philosophy degree. I feel like I'm putting it to use, so I appreciate you having me on. It's good to exercise these, stimulate these mental muscles every once in a while.
Oh yes, for sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that, and I'll link that in the episode notes. But thanks again, and hopefully we can chat again soon.
I'd love that. Thanks so much, Meg.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation that I had with Daniel, then let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can still find me on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book. Follow there for daily updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.